Okay, so I know it's been a while, my eyes are dilated, so I'm kind of squinty right now, but today we're putting together Fandaniel, Telophoroi Ascian, a mono-black commander from the Scions and Spellcraft Recon. He is a 4/5 legendary elder wizard for 4 and a black that says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, surveil 1. As a reminder, surveil says, look at the top card of your library, you may put it into your graveyard. Then it says, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent may sacrifice a non-token creature of their choice. Each opponent who doesn't loses 2 life for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. The interesting thing about Fandaniel is that it's a simple spell slinger commander with many ways to build the deck. You could go Reanimator, token spells, heavy duty removal, and so on. But our version of the deck will focus on Fandaniel's second ability by getting as many spells into the graveyard as possible. This second version of the deck has a face-melting 19 sorceries and 18 instants, all of which focus on our game plan, along with necessities like protecting our commander and getting more spells into the graveyard. I built this deck with cards I actually have in my collection, but there are 15 cards that I label as expensive. If you don't have any of these cards, they can be replaced with budget options that still work with our game plan. Before we get to the interesting part of the deck, which is the spells, let's start with the supporting cast. We have 15 creatures, all of which serve a dual purpose. First, they support our strategy in one way or another, but all of them double as emergency blockers. Sinister Starfish will tap to surveil 1, Bogwitch will let you pay a black and discard a card to add 3 black to your mana pool, Doomed Necromancer will let you pay a black and sack it to put another creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, Morbid Opportunist will let you draw a card whenever 1 or more creatures die, but only once each turn. With Fandaniel out, we're very likely to get an extra card when our opponents choose to sacrifice a creature. Carseat Revenant is here strictly as a blocker, but if we manage to steal a big creature from our opponents, we can use its ability to give that creature flying, lifelink, and death touch. The Stinkweed Imp will kill any creature it blocks, and thanks to Dredge, we can fill our graveyard and get it back into our hand to block again later. The Warring Triad acts as ramp while milling us at the same time, but thanks to Surveil and Mill, it can become a 5/5 flying blocker in the mid to late game very easily. Blightwing Bandit is a 2/2 flying and death touch that says whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, look at the top card of that player's library, then exile it face down. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it. If this is out, we have 18 chances to steal something from our opponents if they force us to cast a spell on their turn. Grim Hireling will let us create treasure tokens if a creature we control deals combat damage to a player. We can also pay a black and sack X treasures to give a creature -X/-X, but we should probably be using those treasures to cast spells instead. Intellect Devourer has a 2-step ability. When it enters, each opponent exiles a card from their hand until it leaves the battlefield, and you may play lands and cast spells among those exiled cards. If you cast a spell this way, you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. And while our opponents can get their cards back if it leaves the battlefield before we get a chance to cast those cards, the chances are high that they'll just discard something less impactful and save their removal for real threats. At worst, you'll get 3 lands to help you cast your spells later. Phyrexian Obliterator is a 5/5 with trample. It says whenever a source deals damage to it, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. This bad boy is just here to soak up removal and deter our opponents from attacking us. Sangromancer is a flying 3/3 that says when a creature an opponent controls dies, you may gain 3 life. When an opponent discards a card, you may gain 3 life. Thanks to Fandaniel, there's a chance that you'll gain 9 life at the end of your turn if they all choose to sack a creature. High Society Hunter is a flying 5/3 that says whenever it attacks, you may sack another creature. If you do, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. But more importantly, whenever a non-token creature dies, draw a card. Best case scenario is you get 3 cards thanks to Fandaniel, since he forces your opponents to sack a non-token creature. Phyrexian Delver is a 3/2 that says when it enters, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. You lose life equal to that card's mana value. This is mainly here to get some of our better creatures, or even our commander, back to the battlefield if he happens to wind up there. And finally, we have Tergrid, God of Fright, a creature that will absolutely eat some removal. She's a 4/5 with Menace that says whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Your opponents will absolutely want to get rid of this or your commander before your end step, otherwise you could end up with 3 creatures right from your opponent's battlefield under your control. We only have 3 enchantments. Scion of Halaster, which says commander creatures you own have. The first time you would draw a card each turn, instead look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your graveyard and the other back on top of your library, then draw a card. This basically gives us another instance of Surveil to get cards we need into our hand, and more spells into the graveyard to feed Fandaniel. Meathook Massacre 2 costs 4 black and 2x, and it says, when it enters, each player sacks X creatures. We don't have a lot of creatures, so we'll usually just cast this for 4 to get it on the field. The rest of it says, whenever a creature you control dies, you may pay 3 life. If you do, return that card under your control with a finality counter on it. More importantly, it says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, they may pay 3 life. If they don't, return that card under your control with a finality counter on it. Finality counters will exile creatures if they would go to the graveyard. This pairs really well with Fandaniel, since your opponents will have to choose between losing a little life and giving us a creature, or losing a lot of life to stop us from getting it. It's a win-win. The last one here is No Mercy. It says whenever a creature successfully deals damage to you, destroy it. This simply limits our opponent's attack options, but we should be careful about big alpha strikes. Now, we only have 8 artifacts. We have a few ramp pieces with Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Mind Stone, but aside from those, we have Shadow Spear, which is only here to remove hexproof and indestructible from our opponent's permanents. Putting this on a big creature from our opponent will do wonders for our life total, though. Strionic Resonator will copy Fandaniel's ability, forcing our opponents to make that choice twice. Palantir of Orthanc gives our opponents another choice. It says at the beginning of your end step, put an influence counter on it and scry 2. Then target opponent may have you draw a card. If that player doesn't, you mill X cards, where X is the number of influence counters on it, and that player loses life equal to the total mana value of those cards. If this resolves before Fandaniel's ability does, a few things happen. First, you scry 2, which will set up your next draw or your next surveil. Then you either draw or put more cards into your graveyard, giving you more fuel in your hand or your graveyard for the Fandaniel trigger. Your opponents either give you cards, lose life, and then lose more life from Fandaniel. Nyx Lotus is a mana rock that enters tapped. It says tap it to choose a color and add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. We don't have a lot of black permanents, but it'll be enough to cast more of some of our mana hungry spells. And finally, we have the Darkness Crystal. I got lucky with this pull. It's a legendary artifact that costs 2 and 2 black, and it says black spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead and you gain 2 life. Then you can pay 4 and 2 black and tap it to put a target creature card exiled with the Darkness Crystal onto the battlefield tapped under your control with 2 1/1 counters on it. So this acts as a pseudo ramp for every spell in our deck, and when our opponents sacrifice a creature because of Fandaniel, it gets exiled and you gain 2 life for each one that gets sacrificed. Then, later on, if you want any particular creature, you can put it onto the battlefield with 2 counters on it at instant speed. There is a lot of synergy here with our game plan. Now, for the good stuff, our instants and sorceries. Bubbling Muck and Dark Ritual will ramp us when we need an explosive turn. Cruel Claw's Heist will steal a card from our opponent's hand, maybe ramp, removal, or some interesting piece of tech that will work with Fandaniel. Who knows? Cornered by black mages will make an opponent sacrifice a creature of their choice, but will give us a 0/1 wizard that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this token deals 1 damage to each opponent. And as you know, we only have 15 creatures in the deck. Yahenni's Expertise will give all creatures -3/-3 until end of turn, and you may cast a card with a mana value 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. This is here to deal with token strategies and cast another spell for free, putting 2 spells into the graveyard for the cost of 1. Dread Summons will mill everyone for X, and for each creature put into the graveyard, we will make a tapped 2/2 zombie. Depending on how many cards you mill during your turn, Fandaniel could threaten a lot of damage at the end of that turn. Ransack the Lab, Resentful Revelation, Stargaze, Atrocious Experiment, Commune with Evil, Dire Sight, and Corpse Churn will all put cards into your graveyard and cards into your hand. Forever Young and Bone Harvest will put creatures from our graveyard on top of our library and let us draw a card, essentially letting us swap a creature for a spell in our graveyard for Fandaniel. Night's Whisper, Sign in Blood, and Gruesome Realization will simply draw us cards, but Gruesome Realization will also wipe out our opponent's 1/1 tokens if they have any. Drag to the Underworld, Withering Torment, Hero's Downfall, Infernal Grasp, Tragic Slip, and Feed the Swarm are removal pieces to deal with big threats that stop our game plan or threaten our life total. If you use Tragic Slip after Fandaniel's trigger but before the turn ends, you can give a creature -13/-13. Ashnod's Intervention, Consumed by Greed, and Stitched Together will get creature cards from our graveyards back to our hands, but Stitched Together will get it back onto the battlefield if we have 7 or more cards in our graveyard, which should be pretty easy. Victimize and Beacon of Unrest will get creature cards from our graveyard onto the battlefield, while Thrilling Encore will put onto the battlefield under our control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. This will turn a board wipe from our opponents into a devastating board state for us in an instant. I have 2 very interesting instances. You Are Already Dead and Blade Brand. Since our opponents should be attacking each other, if a creature becomes chump blocked by our opponents, like say our opponents are attacking each other, and one big creature gets chump blocked by a token, we can use either of these cards to kill off the bigger creature and draw a card while we're completely unthreatened. Just target the token with Blade Brand or the big creature with You Are Already Dead after combat and it'll die. My favorite instance though are Feign Death, Not Dead After All, Undying Malice, Fake Your Own Death, and Vincent's Limit Break. All of these cards will put a creature we control back onto our battlefield if it dies. We're using these to protect our commander instead of traditional pieces like Lightning Greaves, so we can more easily deal with board wipes. Our lands are just swamps with a copy of Myriad Landscape for a small bit of ramp, but you should use utility lands that help you with your game plan if they're in your collection. Using the right spells at the right time are the most important part of this deck, but also getting the best pieces onto the field is also a matter of luck. But thanks to Fandaniel's built-in Surveil on cast ability, not only will we fill our graveyard with spells and deal with various threats, but we'll be able to pick and choose what we need at any given time. If everything goes well, our opponents will try to get rid of our meanest creatures only to find that they just get put back onto the battlefield, or their own creatures come under our control, or they have to choose between losing life or giving us cards or creatures, or find their own creatures getting removed if they dare attack us. And then they take 2 damage at the end of our turn for each instant and sorcery in our graveyard at our end step. The first version of this deck focused on reanimating our opponent's creatures, but I found that I needed a lot more mill to make use of Fandaniel's ability. So this deck is version 2 that I'll be testing at my next Commander Night. I'll update the description with how that turns out, so take a peek if you're curious, and while you're there, hit that sub button if you like what you see. Let me know what you think of this Fandaniel Telophoroi Ascian deck in the comments below, and any tech you think might make it better. That's all for now. You're welcome.